Most of the best tools in the history of home cooking cost less than $1, did not need batteries, and never once broke down. That is not nostalgia talking. That is just the truth, and I have spent long enough in this kitchen to say it plainly. The gadget I want to talk about today is the pastry blender, a simple arc of steel wires or tines set into a wooden or plastic handle. If you grew up in the 1950s or 1960s, there is a good chance one of these lived in your grandmother's kitchen drawer right next to the potato masher and the apple corer. You could buy one for around $1, sometimes a little less, and nearly every home baker in America owned at least one. Then the food processor arrived, and the pastry blender slowly disappeared. The Cuisinart hit American shores in 1973, and by the early 1980s, it had become the aspirational centerpiece of the modern kitchen. Within a single decade, sales of hand tools like the pastry blender dropped sharply, and many manufacturers simply stopped producing them in volume. Today, most kitchens do not have one, and I think that is a genuine loss, not just a sentimental one. By the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly what the pastry blender does that nothing else does quite as well. Why the advice to just use a food processor is mostly wrong for certain jobs, how to use one correctly if you have not touched one in years, where to find one today for very close to that original dollar price, and what you will notice the very first time you make a pie crust or a biscuit the old way. The afterstate I want for you is simple. You will never again stand over a bowl of flour and butter feeling like you are doing it wrong. Now, I want to point something out before we go any further. If you want the full breakdown, the detailed step-by-step methods, the recipes, the full explanation of technique that a short video can only touch on, open the camera app on your phone right now and point it at the QR code in the top right corner of the screen. That will take you straight to the guide that goes alongside this video. And here is the thing. That QR code is going to stay pinned in the top right corner of your screen for the whole video, so you do not have to stop watching or hunt for it later. Whenever you are ready, just open your camera app, point it at that corner, and you are there. Now, let me tell you what a pastry blender actually is and why it worked so well. The pastry blender is one of those tools where the design tells you everything about its purpose. The curved wires or tines are shaped so that when you press them down into a bowl of flour and cold butter, they cut the butter into the flour in small, uneven pieces without ever letting your hands touch the mixture. That last part matters more than most people realize. Human hands run at around 98 degrees. Cold butter needs to stay cold, close to refrigerator temperature, to produce the layers of steam and fat that make a pie crust flaky instead of dense and tough. When you use your hands, even quickly, you are transferring warmth into the fat. The butter starts to soften and blend smoothly into the flour, rather than staying in small, distinct pieces. The result is a crust that bakes up more like shortbread than pastry. It is not bad exactly, but it is not what you were going for. The pastry blender solves this problem entirely. The metal wires stay cool, you grip the handle, press down and rock, and the fat stays cold from start to finish. The old-timers who used these every week knew what they were doing, even if they could not have put the science of it into words. They knew what a good crust looked and felt like, and they knew this tool got them there reliably. I want to say something about the myths here, because there are a couple of ideas floating around that I think send people in the wrong direction. The first one is this: just use 2 forks. You will see this advice everywhere, and yes, 2 forks work in a pinch, but they are awkward. The tines slide past each other, or miss the butter entirely, and you end up working the dough much longer than you should. The more you work pastry dough, the more the gluten develops, and more gluten means a tougher crust. Speed matters. The pastry blender cuts faster and more evenly than 2 forks, which means less working of the dough overall. The second myth is the food processor. This one I hear all the time, and I understand the appeal. It is fast, it is easy, and for some jobs, a food processor is genuinely wonderful. But for pie crust and biscuit dough, it is very easy to overprocess. The blade moves so quickly that what looks like coarse crumbs from the outside can already be a smooth, overworked paste by the time you open the lid. You lose control of the texture in a way that the hand tool simply does not allow. With a pastry blender, you can stop and look at what you have got. You can see the pieces. You are in charge. Here is a thing I keep coming back to. The food processor did not make home bakers better at pie crust. In my experience, it made a lot of people less confident about pie crust because the results were inconsistent and they did not know why. Now, the technique itself. Let me walk you through it the way I would show you standing right here. You start with cold fat. Cold butter straight from the refrigerator, cut into small cubes, maybe half an inch or so. Some folks mix in a little cold lard as well, and I think that is worth trying at least once. Lard makes a crust that is tender and just slightly more workable, and it was the standard fat in most American kitchens through the 1950s. You put your cubed fat into your flour, which you have already measured and chilled if possible, and then you hold the pastry blender by the handle and press it down through the fat and flour with a rocking motion, rotating the bowl a quarter turn every few strokes. You are not stirring, you are cutting. The goal is what bakers call a coarse, pea-sized crumb. You want pieces of fat ranging from about the size of a small pea down to the size of a flake of oatmeal. When you reach that point, you stop, not a stroke later. That mixture goes into your refrigerator for 10 minutes before you add any liquid. Because even with the pastry blender, your hands have been near the bowl and some warmth has transferred to the air around it. Chilling it back down before you add the ice water gives you insurance. And when it comes to the water, add it by the tablespoon. Toss with a fork rather than kneading. Stop the moment the dough just holds together when you press a bit between your fingers. That is it. You are done. Overworking the dough at this stage is where most home bakers lose the battle, no matter what tool they used earlier. A standard single-crust 9-inch pie shell needs no more than 3 to 4 tablespoons of ice water in most cases. If you find yourself pouring in a 5th or 6th tablespoon, your fat pieces were likely already too small, and the flour has been absorbing moisture from the air longer than it should. If you want the complete method written out, all the measurements, the timing for different types of dough, the adjustments you make for biscuits versus pie crust versus scones, open your camera app and point it at the QR code still sitting in the top right corner of your screen. The guide lays out the full step-by-step in a way that you can print out and keep in the kitchen while you work. Now, let me talk about where else the pastry blender earns its keep, because this is a point that most people miss entirely. Everyone thinks of this tool as being only for pie crust, but I use mine for biscuits just as often, and the results are every bit as good. The technique is identical. Cold fat, flour, cut until crumbly, add liquid sparingly. Southern-style biscuits made this way, with cold butter worked in by a pastry blender until the mixture looks almost like coarse sand, with a few larger pieces scattered through. Come out with a lift and a layered interior that I cannot reliably achieve any other way. Beyond biscuits, the pastry blender is genuinely useful for crumble toppings. When you are making a fruit crumble or crisp, you want the butter cut into the oat and flour mixture unevenly, so that some pieces bake into crunchy nuggets and others absorb more fruit juice and go soft. The pastry blender does that in about 30 seconds. A food processor will give you uniform crumbs that bake into something closer to a granola bar, Both are edible. Only one is what you actually wanted. I have also used my pastry blender to mash small batches of avocado, to break up lumps in dry ingredients, and to work cream cheese into a crumbly topping mixture. It is versatile in a quiet, undramatic way. It does not look impressive on a counter, and it will never be featured in a glossy kitchen catalog. That is fine. That is almost the point. Let me talk about finding one today, because the question I hear most often is whether good ones are still being made. They are. You can find perfectly serviceable pastry blenders at kitchen supply stores, at hardware stores that carry a baking section, and very reliably at yard sales and thrift shops, which is where I think they belong. A well-made pastry blender from the 1950s is just as good as a new one, often better, because the older ones tend to have a heavier gauge wire and a more solid handle. If you find one at a yard sale for 50 cents or $1, buy it without hesitation. Run it through the dishwasher, and it is ready to go. Brands like Foley and Echo made tens of thousands of these in the post-war decades, and their tools turn up regularly at estate sales for exactly the kind of price I am describing. If you are buying new, look for one with 5 or 6 wires rather than the cheaper 3-wire versions. The more wires, the more cutting surface, and the faster the job goes. The handle should feel solid in your hand, not hollow plastic that flexes when you press down. You want a slight weight to it. A good one will cost you somewhere between $5 and $10 new, often less if you catch a sale. That is still one of the cheapest, most long-lived tools in the kitchen. Everything I just walked through, the technique, the variations for different doughs, the notes on fat ratios and what to look for in the crumb, is laid out in full in the guide. If you want to have all of that in one place, open your camera app, point it at that QR code in the top right corner of the screen, and it is right there waiting for you. Now I want to address something that is worth saying plainly. There is no marketing budget behind the pastry blender. Nobody is going to run an advertisement telling you that the $5 tool your grandmother owned is the thing you actually need. The money is in the $40 silicone pastry mat, the $90 stand mixer attachment, the food processor with the special blade. I am not saying those things are bad. I am saying they are not necessary for this particular job, and the industry does not have much reason to tell you that. I have watched folks spend good money on equipment that made their baking more complicated without making it better. I used to think that newer meant more reliable. What changed my mind was making a pie crust the old way, with a borrowed pastry blender and a chilled bowl, and pulling a crust out of the oven that was genuinely the best I had ever made at home. No special equipment. No technique I had not learned in the first 10 minutes of trying. Just the right tool for the job. That is what the 1950s kitchen got right. Not that everything was simpler then, because it was not. But the tools that stayed in the drawer were the ones that had earned their place. They were not there because of advertising. They were there because generation after generation of home bakers reached for them and found that they worked. This week, if you have not made a pie crust or a batch of biscuits from scratch in a while, consider it. If you already own a pastry blender, maybe tucked at the back of a drawer somewhere, pull it out and use it. If you do not own one, keep your eye out at thrift stores and garage sales. You are unlikely to pay more than $1 or $2, and the first time you use it properly, you will understand immediately why it survived for as long as it did. Over the coming month, I would encourage you to try the full range of what it can do. A pie crust first, then a fruit crumble, then biscuits if you have not already. Give yourself permission to do it a little slowly the first time and pay attention to what the mixture looks like at each stage. That is how you build the kind of knowledge that sticks. Before I sign off, the guide that goes alongside this video covers the full technique in step-by-step detail. every adjustment for different doughs, the notes on fat ratios, the timing, the troubleshooting for when things go sideways. Open the camera app on your phone, point it at the QR code in the top right corner of the screen, and it is yours. That corner has been there the whole video, so if you missed it earlier, it is still there now. There is no money in teaching people that the simple tool actually works. That is fine. That is the kind of thing worth knowing anyway. Leave me a comment below if you have a memory of a pastry blender from your own kitchen growing up, or from someone else's kitchen. I would genuinely like to hear it. And if you found this helpful, I hope you will stick around. The next video is going to be about another piece of kitchen equipment that most people threw away without realizing what they were giving up. If you are not already subscribed, this is a good moment to do it. I keep these simple, I keep them honest, and I try to make sure every one of them is actually worth your time.